This conference will now be
I
recorded.
like the purple. Hi, everybody. So, better than last time.
Yeah, you
last
just had this.
I know. Well, I get it like twice a year. I never used to have this happen, but apparently this is what has happened to me now in my late 30s. I get this problem. So, yesterday I only was a whisper, so I'm very grateful that this morning I at least had this, and I'm going to talk really close to my mic. So with that, I'm going to call to order our committee of the whole meeting. Andrew.
All right, here with us tonight we have Steve Worster and Terry Tavera with Ruckert and Milky, and they'll be presenting a flood control master plan. This project started in 2018 after the city experienced a 1,000-year rain event. We got over 8 inches of rain in a 14-hour period, and there was widespread flooding throughout the city. The Public Works Commission and the Common Council tasked the Engineering Division to come up with a comprehensive plan to address flooding into the future. So there were plenty of steps that happened along the way. In 2019 and 2020, we updated our storm sewer inventory to make sure we were using the most accurate data. We knew there were some inaccuracies in the existing system, so those were corrected. In 2021 through 2023, Ruckert and Milky did a citywide modeling effort and put together the master plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve, who will go over some of the findings of the report.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Andrew. So just to kind of kick things off, I wanted to just highlight some of the folks that were involved with this. Jane Ellen, Andrew, and Maureen from the engineering group really did some heavy lifting. Andrew was being pretty humble there, I would say. There was a lot of work that goes into this, a study like this, both on the consulting side, but certainly on the city side. And so you should be very proud of the work that each of them did to make this happen. There's a lot of just back and forth, a lot of data gathering, a lot of questions being answered, a lot of questions being asked. And they were very insightful and just frankly a joy to work with. So thank you for that. On the R&M side of things, Terry Tavera, who's going to be speaking next, was the project manager on this project from R&M. My name is Steve Worster. I've been involved in stormwater projects at the city or with the city for 24 years, roughly. So I've been in this room quite a few times talking about stormwater. And then behind the scenes at our team, we had Katie Buhowski and Ryan Kloth, who were doing some of the kind of detailed engineering. They're not here tonight, but certainly kudos goes to them.
Is the mic on? I'm wondering.
I thought
It's
it was
green.
amplified. Yeah.
It is on.
Is it
Okay.
quiet? Is it quiet?
What number is it? Maybe I'll just try to turn it up.
1.
1?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. So first, just a little perspective, and through this kind of history slide in here for a couple of reasons. First, it gave me a reason to research why Watertown was named Watertown. And obviously there's a lot of water in the city. My mom lives here in the city, and we've talked about this. She knows a little bit of the history as well. I didn't realize it was because of some settlers from upstate New York, from a city called Watertown, New York, that settled here in the 40s and 50s, 1840s and 50s, and ultimately when Watertown, Wisconsin incorporated in 1853, brought the name with it. Water is significant to just about every community in the state of Wisconsin, significant to a lot of communities across the country, but it's for different reasons. And so from an engineering perspective, we really had to keep that in mind. The way that water, and when rain falls and snow melts and water runs off and it causes flooding and it carries pollutants with it, the ways that impacts Watertown, Wisconsin is different than your neighbors down the road. It's different than your neighbors down the river, down the Rock River. It's certainly different than Watertown, New York. I learned Watertown, New York has a river that runs right through it, but there's a tremendous amount of elevation drop through the city. And so their problems were, how do we slow this water down? How do we actually be able to move goods and people through our community? We know here in Watertown, Wisconsin, we have different problems. We have a big river that goes right through the city, but it's pretty flat. It moves pretty slow. When it floods, it comes out of its banks and it goes pretty wide, which causes problems throughout large geographic areas of the city. So things like topography, groundwater conditions, those are all things that, from an engineering perspective, the city staff and the R&M team are thinking about and considering when we go through a study like this. And you'll see some of the results of that today. I think it's also important to note some of the historic development patterns. So you all probably know this better than I do. When Watertown developed, it was largely from the river out. And that's a snapshot from the late 1800s on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. And you can see the river running through the city, and you can see the development being concentrated, generally in the areas along the waterway, which was a source of commerce and transportation and everything else. And so as the city developed, it kind of went out from there. And so a lot of the infrastructure that was built, roads, drainage systems, it started at the river and it went out from there. And we know over time, the way that we engineer those systems has changed. What was a appropriately sized storm sewer 100 years ago is not necessarily sized the same way as it is today. So that has changed. You also had to factor in future development. And so all of this water from upstream areas of the city runs off those properties, drains through that old stormwater infrastructure, ultimately to the river. And so how do we factor in the impact of existing development sort of on the outskirts of town, and even going forward, how do we factor that in as we move forward? So all things that had to be considered. Andrew mentioned the 2018 event. I've got a slide here in a second, I'll show you about that. But there was also an event back in June, the summer of 2008. Also a pretty horrendous event here in the city. I was doing some work with you all at the time. I remember this one pretty vividly. There was 2 pretty significant rain events within about a 6 to 7 day period. It dumped about 17 inches of rain, which is, you think about that, it's an extraordinary amount of water in a pretty short period of time. And so the river came up relatively slowly, but it stayed up. It stayed high for a really significant period of time, and that led to some pretty major problems throughout the city. And so a couple pictures that were taken during that event from Riverside Park. I mean, you can see just a sampling of some of the problems. I think that's Tivoli Island on the right. You can't even really see the bridge anymore, pedestrian bridge there. So that's, again, just a little bit of a snapshot as to why we're here talking and why we're thinking about this. Andrew mentioned the 2018 event. Like he said, that was a 1,000-year event. So we only have about 100 years of stormwater history. So how much does it rain over time? We only have about 100 years of that. But we've done the industry has done some statistical analysis, tries to assign probabilities to certain rain events. So when we get a certain amount of rain in a certain period of time, we like to assign a probability to that. What we had in August of 18, which was 9 inches in about 14 hours, Andrew mentioned that was about a 1,000-year event, so an event that would be anticipated to happen once every 1,000 years. So about 0.1% chance in happening any given year. So a pretty rare event, but a pretty significant, pretty severe event. And some pictures, this is the viaduct, quick trip right by the viaduct. You can see some of the problems. There was news coverage of this. If you Google this event in Watertown, you'll get some pretty insightful pictures and some pretty great stories. So what changed? We talk about a 1,000-year event, a 100-year event. What changed? Well, 50 years ago there was flooding. There was flooding in the city. It was still an issue. But rainfall patterns have changed. We're getting more rain and it's coming quicker. So we're getting more severe events more frequently. And so that leads to increased frequency of flooding. When things do flood, it happens not only more frequently, but the magnitude, the damage it causes is generally worse. There's an increased heightened alertness, I would say, of the public health and welfare concerns. 50, 60, 75 years ago, if we had a flood event in the city, we didn't have social media, we didn't have some of the ways to get information out, and so because of that, it raises the concern level for not only you as elected officials, but also city staff, and engineering staff, public works staff. The city's also been very interested, adamant for good reasons, to preserve and grow your tax base. And so as floods happen and they damage property, that has an impact on tax base. So it's important for that reason. And then the third bullet point there is just this idea, this public perception, this public awareness of maybe what was okay 50 years ago, a generation or two ago, isn't necessarily as okay anymore. And so that's, again, why this is important. There's also been a big shift in regulations and interest from a water quality perspective. So you've heard Maureen and Andrew and myself and Jane Ellen before that talking about the various ways that water quality impacts the city through your NR 216 permit from the DNR. That's really sort of shined the spotlight on stormwater across the city as well. Your first permit from a water quality perspective came into being in 2006. So it's hard to believe you've been covered for about 20 years through that permit, but that's a real thing. And then on the good side, I would say funding has increased. Federal funding, state funding, there is more dollars available to help offset some of the costs of this, not all, but some, than there used to be. And last couple things here before Terry hops up here to go through some of the details. I wanted to just give a little bit of perspective of what's happened across the city over the last 20 or so years. So the very first project I was involved with in the city was started in 2000, finished up in about 2002. It's the Leonard and Davis Street area, kind of in a north central part of the city in the blue boundary on the picture there. Joe Radicke and the engineering group led that project, or had the idea for that project. There's a large area of water from the north of the city that comes through that area on its way to the river. So there was some flooding in that neighborhood that we provided some improvements for through larger storm sewer. That led to a large version or large citywide analysis of really the first time we looked at stormwater from a citywide perspective, which was from 2003 to 2006. That also coincided with implementation of your stormwater utility, so also a project that R&M was helping on. So that got put into place in 2006. It was great that when that got set, you now had a funding source to help provide dollars to do some things to make the improvements to these problems that you were experiencing here in the city. 2006 to 2011, the Welsh Road project up in the northwest part of the city, solving flooding on both east and west sides of Welsh Road. That's the blue boundary on the top picture there. 2006 to 2014, the first couple phases of what was called Watertown Metals at the time. It was really stormwater improvements on the Mary and 12th Street corridor. There's more work to do in that area, as you're going to hear from Terry in just a minute here. 2006 was that MS4 and TMDL water quality piece that started to come into play. And then I also wanted to just kind of give a shout out for city staff who have done a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes on this. They provide guidance on development and redevelopment projects. Stormwater is one of the key drivers to what can and can't be done from a development and redevelopment perspective, and so they're doing a great job providing input and guidance on that front. There's been a number of updates to your ordinances over the years. They've led those efforts. And you see this even currently. They're looking for ways continuously to cost effectively incorporate and involve stormwater improvements on other city initiatives like street projects and the plaza across Main Street and things like that. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way. Terry's going to walk through the details of the study itself and some of the recommendations that came out of it.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the, start off with the goals of the study. This was something we went back and forth with the city staff. Said, what's important? What are we trying to get out of this study? So I kind of have a couple of bullets that we're trying to, some of the goals that we're trying to meet or guidance principles as well. First thing, we want to make the roads passable during these storm events, during the 100-year event. And by passable, we're looking at 6-inch maximum of standing water on the road, so you can get primarily emergency vehicles to where they need to go. And preferably, we want to try to go up to the 500-year storm, just because, well, 100 is the typical standard for most communities. Storms are getting bigger, and so we want to be a little bit, if we can, make these improvements last for larger storm events, we want to do that. We want to make sure the wastewater treatment plant, as well as all the sanitary sewer lift stations, are not flooded, and then we can access those. Bridges, railroad crossings, other sites that limit traffic, from one side, especially from one side of the city to the other, or to schools, important thoroughfares. We want to keep those open and available up to the 500-year storm. On residential areas, we're basically trying to reduce the street and urban flooding that impacts the property owners and can cause property damage. Whereas the residential flooding may be smaller, that's typically what groups like yourself probably hear the most from. And then also we want to look at the future growth areas of the city. There were some areas that were pointed out for some potential future growth coming into the city and redevelopment as well, and trying to maximize those areas for stormwater management features. So basically we're trying to help the city understand where the problems are with the study, and then trying to find out what can be done in the future to plan for these areas.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Could you put some definition for us around, like, how much rain is 100 years?
Sure. The typical rainfall for like a 100-year storm is it's about 6.2 inches in 24 hours in one day.
And then 500 is
500's probably in the range of 9.
9 inches, okay. And then I feel like Andrew and Maureen and I talk about this. We call them 100-year events, but really they're
really
happening
not.
with
Right.
greater
all they are is a
frequency.
percentage of that happening. So 100-year storm really has a 1 in 100 chance of happening every year. So unfortunately, if you have a 100-year storm, the next week still that same probability of having another 100-year storm. So we're trying to get away from the 100-year storm just because we're
Like
trying
using
to see
that,
it in the
right, using that terminology. They
Correct.
happen so frequently that it seems
Yeah.
almost ridiculous to keep calling them that.
And the other thing about these, again, like the 100-year storm with a 1% probability storms it depends on how quickly they fall, because most of our stormwater ordinances are based on that 24-hour period of rain, which is about 6.2 inches. However, when it comes into your storm sewer in the downtown areas, you can also have a 100-year storm in 30 minutes, and that may only be 3 inches of rain. And there's multiple 100-year storms. It's not just that one, if it happens, it's never going to happen again. You're probably very likely to happen, in your lifetime. They talk about, flood insurance for a home. You have probably about a 1/3 chance of your home, if you're in the floodplain, of getting flooded during the 100-year storm. But it can be a quick 30-minute, inch and a half rain. If it comes fast enough, it overwhelms your storm sewer systems, and that can cause as much or a different type of flooding.
Thank you.
And so we kind of want to look at all those options. This is just kind of the steps that we took in the study, and I'll kind of run through this really quickly. But first thing was we did an inventory of the existing planning data that was out there, and then the next step was we did hydrologic and hydraulic modeling. And then we looked at some high-level alternative analysis for those areas where it deemed that we had some flooding, and then looked at some detailed alternative and recommendations. And that's kind of the next steps I'm going to go through here. So on the inventory portion, this was basically we're just trying to find out what was out there. We had another study that we worked with the city on previously, and that was data gathering. That picture up in the upper right, that's part of our scanning software. We have actually put a scan into the manholes, and we can do like a 3D model of all the pipes and missing things. So we did that, and then we provided all this information, raw data, to the city, who then updated the GIS, and that was kind of the basis of our storm sewer system and modeling. We also updated the watershed and drainage area boundaries. Some of those were out there previously from different studies, some from water quality studies, but from when we get into the stormwater modeling, we have to update those and get a little bit more detailed. And then finally, the city provided some known flooding areas, which is a great place to start. The great thing about the city staff is they take a lot of these previous flood events and they actually put them right in the GIS system. So you can actually see staff and go in there and say, hey, this is where problem areas are. And that also helps us focus where we want to work on. I know this is really hard to see. I apologize. It's hard to get this map in here, but this is the existing storm sewer map. So all the little dots in there that look like kind of purple dots, those are structures or manholes or catch basins. In between there, there's some orange lines that connect them. And then you see all these different colors. So all those different colors are the stormwater basins that we defined and we actually looked at for different parts of our study. When you get to the hydrologic and hydraulic analysis, we used what's called a two-dimensional model. The program we use is called PC Swim. The nice thing about this is typically you have separate models for one for your ponds, one for your storm sewers, one for overland flow. And this model, it's a little bit more complicated. It takes a while to put all the information together and to run, but it gives you some really good results. It's going to give you not only what your capacity is of your storm sewer and pipes, it's going to say what's the elevation in your open channels. If you have a stormwater pond or a low area, it'll tell you what the flooding depths are and then how wide the flooding is. NOAA Atlas 14 precipitation data, that's the base data that we start with. That's that, about that 6.2 inches rainfall. But as I mentioned, depending on how long you look, if it's 24 hours or 2 hours or 1 hour, there's different rainfalls that equal different frequency events. We then use the Jefferson and Dodge County digital elevation model, and I'll show you what that is next. That's basically a 3D model. For sump pumps, primarily we would ignore those because by the time you get a larger storm event, in general they're negligible because they're so small. However, there are a few areas in the city where there's just a lot of sump pumps and they run a lot. And so in those areas, and we worked with city staff in identifying those, we added some base flow from all the sump pumps into our analysis. We did look at part of the town of Emmett that was looking at it as a future annexation, as in our model. And then also, this is probably very important in the study, is we really only looked at pipes 18-inch and larger. And the reason why we did that is at some point we had to get the model small enough, otherwise we'd only be able to work on a few different areas. So by limiting the pipe size to 18 inches, we could get as much of the city modeled as possible. And then those are typically the larger system with the larger flooding is. And you do look at some of the smaller pipes, and in some areas when we get into the detailed modeling, we've already looked at some of the smaller pipes if they're in areas that would affect the depth or the width of flooding. But you'll find in some areas may only have a 12 or 15-inch pipe, and those areas did not get modeled as part of this study. So we just had that was just kind of limiting the scope and the cost of the study. This is just an example of what the DEM or digital elevation model. So we get this from the counties in 3D, and then we build this right into our models. And anywhere this is kind of a crisscross pattern. Those are all the roads in this case. And when the elevation drops down, those areas will fill with water, overflow, or if they're high, the water will run off. And that's how we build these right into our model to determine how deep and what the depth is, the width of standing water during storm events. So again, I apologize, these are really hard to show, these huge maps in a meeting like this, but hopefully you'll take a look at the study individually afterwards or digitally. But this is kind of the results. So anywhere where you see kind of a bluish color, that's the depth of flooding during this 500-year storm event that we modeled. And we did model multiple storms. We looked at the 10-year, the 100-year, the 100-year, and the 500-year. On this map, we also have known floodplains in there and some different drainage areas. But so this is kind of our base map that we had after we modeled the entire city. And then this is where we started with. Next step was to actually go, okay, which one of these areas we have problems with? And then we started prioritizing which areas we want to do further analysis. And so when we go to the further analysis, basically we cut that whole map down to 15 areas. And we looked at, to get those 15 areas, we looked at the history of flooding in that area, number of structures flooded, what the flooding depths were previously, what the land use is. Is this existing residential? Is this commercial? Is it future development area? And then the city also had quite a bit of impact on here on this prioritization too. They looked at, okay, do we have sanitary sewer impacts, or are we flooding the sanitary sewers or the lift stations? Do they have prior damage records in that area? So is this something that's happening relatively frequently? And then finally, we have other community impacts. Community impacts could be anything from, it's just a very important road to get from one side of the town to the other, or maybe this is the road that goes to the high school or to, the city center or something like that. So they were able to add points onto that, and that's kind of how we came up with this prioritization. We then looked at some water quality of some of these. I'll talk about that a little bit later, a little bit more detail. But from this point then, we had wanted to come up with some different flood control best management practices. And best management practices there's a wide variety of best management practices. Some of them are just making a bigger pipe. Some of them are putting stormwater ponds or biofiltration. Some of them are working with the residents to see if we can put in rain gardens on a really small local scale, especially in the residential. And then we look at environmental impacts in all these areas of what these alternatives would affect. Are we in the floodplain? Are there wetlands out there? Are there other potential contamination from previous spills? We have to look at all those sites to find the final cost and if it's even buildable. And I'll just kind of give you a summary. This is the summary of kind of the table. And it's not even all of the priorities, but you'll see on the top, we have the frequency of flooding, the depth of flooding, and then you get the more the depth, there's more points that are assigned to that area. So all the sub areas on the left, and we have this data, this table that goes across, and we try to find out kind of what the priority score is. And just because these are high priority, they aren't necessarily the highest priority. They may not be the highest priority with the city. These are just priorities to help us organize which ones have a big effect. And then we have to look at things such as cost, as land acquisition necessary, of multiple other things, other infrastructure projects in that area to actually do for actual construction and design. I'm going to quickly go through then these areas, and I'm probably going to spend a quick minute or two, but I just want to point out at least what these 15 areas are. First one in the MRR, that is just the basin, so that's Middle Rock River Basin. So
I
the first
asked
one's,
them that.
yes.
Write that down. I asked that during the prep. I'm like, what's MRR?
Yep. Yeah, so the Middle Rock River, and those are from the TMDL side. I'll talk about that real quickly at the end here too. But that's flooding near the residential subdivision near Red Fox Court. You can see everywhere in the blue on that map, that's where flooding was from during our study. And then we have some orange pipes on there, another hard to see at the scale, but and then we're looking at some green infrastructure, BMPs. Those would be on, again, at the residential properties. And then some storm sewer upsizing. The second one is MRR 5.2. So this is a residential subdivision near South Street and Winnebago Way. So again, on the kind of the west side of the city. Same thing, we have some storm sewer upsizing recommended, as well as some green infrastructure on the residential. And when we have the residential properties, likely the way we typically do these is we don't until we require those. It's up to the community, but it's typically a voluntary basis. But we go to the houses that are flooded in the past because they're the most likely to participate in a program like this. 5.3, 5.5, this is kind of a combined area. This is in the Fairview Drive and Hoffman Drive area. It's right along the west side of the river there. I believe this is where the potential proposed fire station is in this area. So we have some storm sewer upsizing that goes up Fairview Drive. There's a recommended upsizing of the culvert under Hoffman Drive, replacing part of the swale north of Bernard Street with a pipe just going to connect the two, and then also grading above the floodplain. So this is an area that once the river goes up, it actually backs up water into that area because it's low. And so one of the things you have to look about for that is if you do any development, you want to make sure it's high enough so that even if it's not flooding from the city, when the river goes up, you're safe from that as well. 5.6, this is an industrial area near Dayton Street and West, where we were looking at some potential stormwater detention to reduce flows. And anywhere where I say stormwater detention, basically what we're trying to do is reduce the peak flows. And then we'll also likely get some type of water quality benefit out of those as well. 5.8, that's near Clement Street and Meadow. That's another residential area along the roads and in backyard flooding. Again, some storm sewer infrastructure upsizing and some potential underground detention. Most of the times when we have detention, we try to do it above ground just because it's a little bit cheaper and most cost effective. But some of these areas where they're completely built out, underground detention works out best. And you'll see that in some of the other areas as well. 5.1, this is some of the pictures that Steve showed earlier, right? This is Main Street and Carriage Hill Drive by the viaduct. We have everything from storm sewer infrastructure upsizing, some wet detention basins, potentially some stormwater pumping in that area. And then this one also includes potential future storage or stormwater detention upstream in the future growth area. So we're trying to say, okay, we may not be able to do this all right here in the city or in the developed area, but if we know there's potential development happening upstream in the future, if we can reserve some of that land for some detention to slow down some of that water, we're going to try to do that. 6.1, this is near 9th Street and Dodge, kind of by the YMCA area. This is some continued flooding that's happening. You can see on the map, a lot of blue. In this case, the darker the blue, the deeper the water is. And that area is where it is the darker blue in the upper right-hand corner. And so we're looking at some, again, storm sewer upsizing and some underground detention. And when you go into the study on each one of these models, it'll show you, the pipes that have to be upsized and some cost. We have Hart Street. This is 6.2. This is kind of between 9th Street and 12th Street. Again, another area that's had a lot of problems historically. Looking at some storm infrastructure upsizing is the primary basis for that, as well as some underground detention. The area in red there, that's the deepest water. That's the Mary Street Pond. So that's not somebody's yard, but that's already where we want water to go. 6.3, this is another residential and industrial area near 3rd Street and River Drive. This is kind of on the west end of that Hart. So a lot of these areas, sometimes they overlap. But we can look at these regional facilities, especially for some of the newer areas maybe coming into the city, or where these large drainage areas that come into the city. We can reduce these regional facilities before it gets into the downtown area. That's what we're trying to do. And then also consider environmentally sensitive infrastructure improvements in all the options. I did mention this earlier, but just real briefly about the water quality. There was a companion water quality study that went with this, with our flood control study. So basically, we took the results of our flood control study, and then we looked at the water quality portion of that. That was actually from a grant that the city had. So the city, what Steve had mentioned earlier, where a lot of these grants are for water quality. You get a lot more grants for water quality than water quantity and flooding, unfortunately. But so we took a look and said, okay, if we used all the recommendations from the flood control, how much benefit could we get from the water quality? And so basically, that's just kind of a summary. 9 BMPs or ponds or other features like that were recommended in the study. Of that, you can get 117,000 pounds of total suspended solids reduction and 285 pounds of total phosphorus reduction. And those are numbers that you're trying to reach for the TMDL. So the TMDL is the total maximum daily load. That's the limits on the river itself that these DNR has said, if you want to remove these, any impairments on your waterway, you have to remove this much. And so we're trying to meet those. And your permits, your MS4 permits that you have to do, you're also trying to meet those goals. All right, so in summary, like I said, the prioritization, that was really for us to focus on what areas to model. It's not necessarily the order that the city has to follow. So the next thing that you guys have to do is take a look at study and potentially improve it or recommend it, and then look at your long-term CIP plan. What projects do you want to do first? Which ones do you have money for? Which ones do you want to go after grants for? And then you have to do some detailed analysis. Our recommendations are to try to fix that problem that was there. They may not be, at the end of the day, the best solution. And I say that in some of these areas where that's going to come to reasonable factor in the engineering solutions. One of the areas is by the viaduct. That's probably the most expensive recommendation in all the areas because it's large pumps, large stormwater ponds, and if you only have to pump out the stormwater once every 100 years or once every 50 years, it's a very expensive system. Maybe there are some other ways. So the study looks at how to fix that, but you may say, well, I only want to do these parts of the study, and maybe you're just better off saying, I'm just going to close that road. If it only happens once every 25 years or once every 50 years, it's more of a planning, saying, okay, we want to set up detours, we want to, tell the public where to go. So those are some future decisions that have to be made as you proceed with this study. If you go through everything, it's anywhere between 26 and $31 million. It's a lot of money. That includes engineering and everything, but it's, this is not a one-time fix. This is a long-term project and problem that the city's going to have to take a look at. There are a few the highest priority areas were 6.3, 6.2, 5.1. I know one of those is Hart Street. I can't remember which one it is, but so that one, the city staff is already kind of working on some further design on those areas. It's that they're already kind of hopped on the first one and looking at what can be done, getting a little bit more detailed engineering and alternatives. And then finally, that the redevelopment. I kind of mentioned that again, but we've talked internally about a lot of projects that may redevelop, and those could be great places to implement some of these stormwater management plans at a cheaper cost than having to buy a property. So those are very important that whenever a property opens up or when somebody comes to the city and says, I have an idea of something like this, keep those in mind. Make sure you talk to the city staff, the engineering staff about, is there something in the report that we could incorporate with that? And that's it. I guess I'll open up for any questions, comments.
Mr. Molnar.
Just a question. You mentioned Highway 19, that viaduct, I believe. Now, that's a state highway. The state will have a say in that also.
They will, correct. Yep. And most of our improvements are not road improvements. They are stormwater improvements. But you would definitely need permanent, correct. Anything along a county highway or a state highway, even if you're going underneath it, you definitely need approvals for that. And you'll see even in that area too, some of the stormwater, I'll call detention facilities, some of them are owned by the city, some are not. And so those are ones that you would have to say, okay, if it makes sense to do something in that area, we'll have to start approaching some of these neighbors and saying, what is the benefit of, can you explain the benefit to that property owner? Hey, if we reduce your flooding, can we potentially build some underground storage, for example, on your property?
One other question. Now, when you say underground retention, I take it that's piping, or how does
Yeah,
it?
it's typically a pipe system or concrete, or so they have plastic ones, but it's basically the nice thing about them is you can put something on top of them. So you basically dig the hole, you put in these big empty chambers, and then you can cover it with pavement. A lot of times you put them in parking lots, and so those are great for the really dense downtown areas.
Question on that, retaining the water and pipe work like that, over time that would retain sediment also, wouldn't it?
Correct. Yep. And so you can, and you even in the underground detention, you build in. There's some great pictures. Thanks for bringing those up. Whoever did that. But yeah.
This isn't my first time.
All these type of systems, you typically put a water quality benefit in here as well, and so you try to get the water quality out of those two.
Milder cooling.
Yep. And then so typically what will happen is you either have some standing water or some sumps or different ways to settle things out. And then every once in a while you come in with your vacuum truck and clean those out and collect all the floatables, for example.
Other questions, Mr. Smith?
Yes. One of the areas that has historically, in the recent past, been very problematic is
Yeah, I don't think we looked exactly, none of the 15, you're correct, I don't think any of the 15 included that area. There are some general recommendations in the study that talk about any future lands coming in. We've kind of identified large scale, and when we say large scale, I'll say if I have 150 acres potentially coming in, we'll say some of the areas in the study will say that you could potentially put in 15 or 20 acre feet of stormwater storage in that area someplace. That's kind of the extent of the design, but there are some general recommendations for areas like that that were not included in the 15 areas that we'll definitely have to look at. But that would be definitely one of those areas, again, the general recommendations about we're having this land in, all that water is going to come in, and once it gets into the city proper, it's going to cause problems. So if we can slow that down before it gets there, it's going to save a lot of cost and flooding. Let's see.
Mr. Schmidt? Oh, go ahead, Mr.
Okay.
Smith.
One of the areas that causes the problem in Silver Creek, Florida, is the fact that Silver Creek enters into between dams. And is any part of your study addressing how the dam, especially the lower dam, is going to be managed, or do you have recommendations that would make result in changes? Because when there's any problem with that lower dam, the area most immediately affected is the back up Silver Creek. And I didn't know if that was part of your study.
Yeah, unfortunately, that area, that we did not look at that as part of our scope. Not to say it can't be done, but that was not included, at least as part of this study, looking at any of the dams.
With these reports, have you found in the past in other municipalities, does this help give us leverage to work with the DNR to get them to work with us in regard to like dredging operations, or to take existing lands that have been dubbed wetlands within the municipality borders and convert some of that into a natural looking retention pond that we use for stormwater runoff but has an aesthetically appealing function to it? Because there's several pieces of land in the areas mentioned, because a lot of that falls into my district, in regard to reducing the flooding but doing so in a manner that's aesthetically appeasing, using existing land that's not built on, but the DNR would have to get, we'd have to get their buy-in. Was this report, would this give us leverage to help get their buy-in, showing these are a study that we've been done through a third-party entity to get the dredging operations to, in spots deep in the Rock River, to help keep the water from going out so fast, and allow us to control it that way, along with some of these other areas, and deepening some of these retention ponds and taking the depth from 6 to 8 feet now and making it 2 to 3 times that.
Yeah, I mean, I think these studies definitely help on that. I mean, because especially if you're going to go after grant funding, when you go after grant funding, you have to come up with a plan of what you're going to do, and that's going to cost you time and money. And so if some of those are already included, you can just kind of grab that information and put it together. You might need a little bit more work, on the actual grant application, but you need this background data to justify that. And as far as filling the wetlands and things like that, there's different ways you can enhance wetlands or natural areas. Some of it's might just be just leaving it as it and changing zoning. I mean, but there's a wide variety of things that I think the study should be able to help you with.
Okay.
I'll just ask one more in terms of the goals of the piece here. One of the things that I guess I hoped to hear, but I wasn't quite sure I heard, was around any sort of reduced erosion of the major waterways. For example, I think in 2008 we lost a lot of grass and whatnot and other features along the river south of the dam as the water sort of tore out of there. So are there considerations in this for similar events?
Yeah. And I think there are a couple sections I didn't mention because they're not in the 15 areas, but we do have some general areas on erosion in the report itself. But I mean, most of our areas are focused on just those problem areas, and when we look at those problem areas, we're also looking for erosion too. We're trying to find a solution that's going to reduce the erosion if there is problems. We didn't specifically have, write up a special, we didn't, one of the 15 areas, I'll say, wasn't just talking about erosion, for example, along the river or different areas like that. But we have some general notes on that.
Thank you.
Has your company done a similar flood control master plan for other communities in Wisconsin?
Yes, yep. We've done numerous for all of them. We can give you a list. Be happy to. Matter of fact, probably one of the best ones I can kind of think of that's give you easy access to is City of Kenosha. So if you go into City of Kenosha's floodplain study, we have what's called a story map. It includes the summary of the report that we came up, and then it also has individual projects that they've started. That some of them we've helped them with. Everything from permits and pictures, and it actually has little sliders that you can say, you can click on your computer with your mouse and slide it and say, this is what it was before flood, with the flood, and this is what it was after the improvement. So there's a lot of things, and that was kind of a potential next step. We put it as an optional; it wasn't included yet, the story map portion of it. But yeah, I encourage you to take a quick look at that if you have a chance, or we could even share that with you.
I suspect she has an additional question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, no, that's just really interesting because it would be good for us, I think, to speak to these communities and see how they've taken the plan and converted it into an action and implementation and funding sources. And, is this a 10-year, 20-year plan, and how they're breaking it out into smaller pieces to make it more manageable. So I'd appreciate getting that information.
Yeah, but we'll send it off to the city, and then we can,
Sure.
you guys can share it.
Thank you.
I know our next step is Public Works, right? So that's kind of our next actionable step. We plan to take it to Public Works, delve into the study in totality, not just those 15 areas, and then gain from Public Works what their desire is for prioritization and budgeting, and then Andrew will start to build that into the 5-year capital plan. Anybody else? Well, I know that this has been a lot of work. I feel like we've been doing this study for years. So I know Maureen and Andrew and Jane Ellen did a ton of work, and I know Steve acknowledged them already, but I think it's important. I've been antsy for this study. I was antsy when Hart Street didn't go because we couldn't design it to a level to control water appropriately. We will not solve this problem, right? Like, we'll solve it and then something else will change. But what I'm encouraged by is that we actually, when they showed the data table, I was like, oh, Alderperson Davis is going to love this table, right? Like, it allows us to make informed, data-driven decisions, some of which we've already discussed and thought, we might as well just build another road instead of trying to get water out of the viaduct area. It's cheaper to probably just build a road through Brancourt Park to get people out of town, right? Like, we started just to already think about some things like that because of the information that we have available to us. I'm not saying we're doing that. I feel like I need to disclaimer that. But it did give us data to be able to have creative and informed decisions. So thank you guys so much. I know it's been a lot of time and effort. I feel very confident knowing that we're going to be able to move the needle a little bit strategically with all of your guys' support and input as we now have the results of this. So.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'll take a motion to adjourn, and then we'll have about 5 minutes. Mr. Moldenhauer, Mr. Schmidt, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, our committee of the whole is adjourned. You guys, you have a few minutes to get water, use the restroom, we'll be right back. evening. We do have an invocation. So I'm going to invite Pastor Seth Hebner from Faith Lutheran up, and then we'll get started after this. Pastor. I hope so.
We pray. Gracious and Heavenly Father, I thank you for the new year that we just started, and thank you for the gift of life and just providing for our needs. I also give you thanks for the leaders of this great place where we live. I thank you for their time and willingness to serve. Give these men and women wisdom and understanding and best how to lead each citizen that live in this community. Though there may be difficult times in the upcoming year, guide them and give them confidence as they approach each situation. Be with all workers of this city as they work with diligence, as you have given each person certain gifts for them to use to help others. Lord Jesus, I give thanks for your love. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. All right. It is 7:02, so I'm going to call our Tuesday, January 2nd council meeting to order. Megan, will you please take the roll?
Davis. Lampy. Board. Bartz. Smith.
Here.
Schmid.
Here.
Wetzel.
Here.
Moldenhauer.
Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, the first item on our agenda is the minutes of the council meeting from December 19th. Comments or questions on those minutes from anybody? All right, then let's go to comments and suggestions from citizens present. Megan?
Representative Penterman.
We're lucky to have Representative Penterman with us this evening. Welcome, sir, to the Common Council Chambers.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for having me, members of the council and community members. I just wanted to stop by with the start of the new year to just say hello and give you a brief legislative update. It's been a very, very, very busy legislative session. So it's my first full term in the State Assembly. So I went through the budget cycle and everything since day one on Inauguration Day. And I'm not going to rehash everything. There's been a lot, especially with the budget. But it has been a good session. We're keeping the Brewers in Wisconsin through 2050, so happy to get that done. Starting with the class of 2028, every graduating high school senior will have need to take at least one semester of personal financial literacy. So super, super excited we got that done. I was in the classroom earlier today, substitute teaching over at Dodgeland, and just the value of the basics for personal financial literacy with our kids and getting them to understand how to responsibly manage credit, how to balance a budget, just basic stuff, how to take out loans, how to how to pay rent, how to pay taxes, all that good stuff. Obviously, with shared revenue, Watertown got about a 27% increase over last year. That was a big win. I think overall for the state of Wisconsin, that was a big win in the budget. There's a number of housing initiatives we got in the budget, almost $500 million for housing projects, for the housing rehabilitation loan program. That was my bill. More information should be coming out from WIDA in the coming months. So I'm going to make sure that is pushed down to you guys so that we can get as many applicants as possible. The Main Street loan rehabilitation program, so rehab for second story occupancy above businesses that has possibly fallen into disrepair over the years, getting that rehabbed and making that a livable, usable space once again. So be on the lookout for that from my office. A lot of good stuff. I want to make sure you guys have that information. But there's always more work to do. So there's a number of bills we got done this session, but with the remaining session, I'm on the Speaker's Task Force on Childhood Obesity. Childhood obesity has become a major problem in this state. It's something that, if you look at the data throughout the years, has continued to go up and up and up. And from a national security level, it's impacting our ability to recruit young individuals to go into the armed forces, so that's a problem. It also inhibits natural wellness and just overall well-being, so that's something that we're continuing to look at, and we're going to hopefully be coming out with a package of bills and ideas to hopefully tackle that issue. There's a school bus bill that I introduced that will, for the first time since 1983, increase the fines for illegally passing a school bus with its red lights flashing. The fine hasn't gone up since well before I was born, so just bringing that more into line with the severity of that crime. There's some other items. One of my personal favorites, I guess, is one of the more glamorous bills is a lottery bill that will allow lottery winners to remain anonymous if they win over $1 million in Wisconsin for up to a year. Many neighboring states do it. To me, it's common sense. It's kind of a compromise bill as written, because I think that most lottery winners should be able to remain anonymous, especially over a substantially large amount, such as $1 million for their lifetime. But there's been some pushback over the years, so we're trying to find a true compromise and get something done there. So before I forget, I have state maps that are available for any members who would like them. I still have a state map in my car, because sometimes the GPS breaks down, or if you don't have data or service or whatever. I also have the Wisconsin Blue Book. I have one with me tonight, but I have many. So if you send my office an email or call my office, I'd be more than happy to drop one off for you. We have plenty, and you've already paid for it with your tax dollars, so a lot of good information about all things Wisconsin. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be willing to give it a shot.
They're all looking at me because we normally aren't allowed question and answer during this session. So how about this? If you have questions, will you please reach out to Representative Penterman after the meeting? Would that be okay? All right. Does anyone want to thank Representative Penterman, though, with me? Representative Penterman, I can't remember if I shared this directly with you or not, but this was one of it was the lowest tax levy increase in over a decade for us, a historical investment in police and fire. Our contracts were a 15% wage increase over the next 2 years, whereas before we were at the bottom to the middle of the pack. I mean, just really profound stuff for us. So I know that one was hard fought. We fought it very hard for very long. And I know Representative Penterman's been very helpful for us on the bridge as well. So thank you on behalf of our Common Council for your work on behalf of our community. We really appreciate it. Anyone else, Megan? Or anyone remotely that would like to comment? All right. We do have a public hearing this evening, so this is a public hearing to amend Section 550-53D junkyard or salvage yard to allow the Planning Commission to adjust setbacks through a conditional use permit. I will open that public hearing. If anyone would like to comment, you can come to the microphone or say so if you're attending remotely. All right, we'll close that public hearing. Let's move on to reports. The only report item for today is the Planning Commission minutes from December 11th. Comments or questions from anyone on that? All right, then let's move to new business. There are a few appointments there for your consideration. Is there a motion for the appointments? Mr. Smith?
Move for the approval of your appointments.
Thank you. Motion by Mr. Smith, second by Mr. Moldenhauer. Any comments or questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, and then next is the accounts payable. Motion by Mr. Moldenhauer, second by Mr. Bartz. Comments or questions from anyone? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Very good. Next is miscellaneous business. You have the payroll summary from November 29th to December 12th. Comments or questions on that? All right, let's move to ordinances then. Our first is ordinance 24-01. This is to amend Chapter 76, Article 2, Section 76-13 in our city code. This is an increase to the room tax. This is here from me and the Finance Committee. Mr. Lampe.
I would so move.
Motion by Mr. Lampe. Second. Second by Ms. Davis. Comments or questions from anyone? Megan. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith.
Well, I did have a question. I did not get a copy of the minutes for the referenced meeting of the Tourism Commission. Obviously, there's close overlap between when they met and our previous meeting, and it's not in our packet tonight. So I guess, I don't know if there is any addressing within those minutes of what is my concern, and that is generally you get less of something that you tax. We already obviously have a 5% tax for the room rate, but I had anticipated we might have somebody from the either the Tourism Commission tonight or possibly people from the accommodations organization that would be here. I'm just wondering if there was any consideration of any objective data anticipating what the impact would be of that degree of increase in a occupancy tax.
Not on the Tourism Commission. I was previously, but I was at the meeting where basically they approved the tax increase, so I can I can speak to some of that. On the Tourism Commission, there's a representative from one of the major local hotels here. They really were neutral in terms of the recommendation. They didn't think that it would affect the room tax in any way. I also had an opportunity to chat with one of the other owners of some downtown hotels here in Watertown subsequent to that, and they knew that the room tax was on the finance agenda at this point. And again, basically a neutral understanding from them. They didn't really think that it would affect bookings one way or another. One of the main things that came into consideration when we were looking at room tax increases is basically indexing it to surrounding communities. And so, for example, Johnson Creek and some of the other communities up and down 26, back and forth 16 and 19 already are at this higher room tax rate. We were by far an anomaly in terms of being well underneath the rate that we're trying to set it to. At the moment, this essentially resets us to par in terms of neighboring communities, in terms of the tax. But on your key question, yeah, I've had a chance to chat with either the representative or owners of several of the hotels, and it was neutral in terms of whether or not I did not hear a single one express that it would reduce any bookings in the area.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
I guess that is a very helpful perspective. The first implementation of the room tax happened back when I was mayor. I had not only proposed it and supported it, but there was a very, very substantial opposition to that, and the owners of various establishments came out and were very upset and were convinced that the room tax would have a decidedly detrimental effect upon a number of occupants that they would have in their establishments and so forth. So apparently over the course of time, it's either become apparent that that did not happen to any significant degree, or that this simply leaves Watertown on a par with surrounding communities such that we would not be at a disadvantage. Not that too many tourists are likely to look at the room tax before they come and stay at an establishment. But I was interested that perhaps there had been some discussion of that at that tourism meeting on the 14th.
Thank you. Mr. Do you have something to add?
I do, and in fact, that specific thing was discussed. In looking back through the history of the room tax, the Tourism Commission did review, the original room tax that was in place, saw the signature paperwork and everything else from that term, and so we did talk about that at that particular time. And I believe and this is speculation, I believe some of what you are observing right now is essentially when you book a room, you very often see the room rate exclusive of any of the room taxes or whatnot that are added on. It was just, you know, the way that people book rooms is just sort of invisible to them, and that really has, I think, over time, just not affected the way that rooms are marketed or sold on price. So I do believe that that's an attitude that has changed, and like I said, I talked to a number of the folks who bring people through on a regular basis, and it was not the most interesting thing they wanted to talk to me about in those conversations. That the room tax was just not top of mind, even though we were on the precipice of changing it, and they knew it.
Mr. Schmidt?
So, I would be in the camp of challenging a rate increase of that distance. Like, I understand that we're, by the account, lower than everyone else around us. That's not a bad thing. Like, that just means we're more appealing to people to book out. I don't think we've seen the impact of a higher tax rate just because we don't have a lot of rooms. So, because of supply and demand, our room rates are going to fill up faster because there's not a lot to start with. The reason why people don't pay attention to room rates based on cities or taxes or counties is because a lot of times you don't find out until after the fact. And I would tell you, someone who's traveled a lot, especially with family, that's irritating as all get out. Now, I appreciate some locations put it up front where they require the facility to tell you at the time of booking, here are all the applicable taxes based on your stay. Now, that takes a change based on that location. So I don't see the need just to put us on par as a justification. That's not a good sell for me, so I would oppose it.
I don't want to keep making you be the speaker for this, but there was or was this you? The impetus, go ahead, Mark.
The request actually started with our tourism commission. They were looking at the downside of COVID and its impact on their ability to bring budget into them. When we collect this tax, 70% is delivered then to the tourism commission for their budget. This is the primary source of their funding. And so it was through a history of looking back in time, 2018, just giving you the gross revenues of all of our short-term rental space, it was 2.8. 2019, it went down to 2.6. 2020, it went down even further to 1.3. Then there was an increase, 2021, 1.7 million. And 2022, it's on the rebound, 2.4 million. But the 2.4 million in 22 isn't at the same level as our total revenue was before COVID. And so they're looking for how do we secure additional revenue to be able to do the marketing for the city of Watertown that is necessary. And so this impetus actually came from them at the same time that they were doing this request of our part. We had a staff member in our office that happened to go to a clerk course, a conference, where this very topic was being discussed. 8% is the maximum that any community is allowed to tax, and the surrounding towns are all pretty much at that 8% and have been for a while. I don't have the 23 numbers for anybody. This was a 22 listing that is published by the state for it and all. The total revenue anticipated if we move from the existing to 8% is an increase of about $70,000. Tourism would receive about $49,000 of that. The city account would receive $21,000. So it's predominantly for the tourism group for their marketing of the city of Watertown on our behalf.
Thank you. Ms. Davis.
We did receive in the Finance Committee a really thorough breakdown, a memo from Mr. Stevens, and then a look at the different room tax rates. So we were provided 12 different communities and their current room tax rates. Of those 12, 7 are at 8%, including Johnson Creek. Our most, I would say, our direct competitor would be Johnson Creek, and then also Oconomowoc. So because, as you all have already touched on, because the nature of shopping for and booking a hotel room has moved to online, which just gives you the rate for that room, I think it's become less of an issue for the hotels themselves. So I think this actually brings us to where those communities are, and it makes sense that individuals that are coming into our community are paying that 8%, that just like they would if they went to Johnson Creek or Oconomowoc or any of these other communities.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm one of those non-tax people because I look at this as not just a room tax for Watertown. It's not just a 3% increase, going from 5% to 8%. I look at this as the bigger picture. It's another tax added on to people who are already being taxed at close to a 60% tax rate on what they make. Because they're taxing what they make, they tax on what they spend, they tax them when they go on vacation, they tax them when they buy something. Okay, this is one of those issues that for me, I try to look at it from the person who, the average person in our community, it's just another tax they're looking at. It may not be them because we live here, we have homes here, we rent here, whatever the case may be. But when our friends and family come here, or we want to hold an event and bring our friends and family here for graduations or special events, that's an extra cost burden to family members that, granted, it may be nothing, but it just adds to the scope of taxes. It adds to the scope of, now we're using, I hate the concept of COVID made all these problems. Well, self-inflicted pain is self-inflicted pain. Okay, so this is just a natural ripple effect from that event. And it all, Representative Pettleman sees it at the state level. So the counties have to raise taxes, we have to raise taxes, the state raises taxes, the federal government raises taxes. So these taxes come from something, and it comes from people's income. Their income is not raising it the rate our taxes are going up. We did a phenomenal job at a 0.5% increase. I got a lot of compliments at how well that was, and people were actually just shocked at how low that was.
I was going to remind you of that.
No, I did, and so I give praise where praise is due, and you know this.
I know, and Jefferson County didn't raise theirs either, right?
And
Dodge
so-
was tiny, so.
And so there's a lot of good things I saw, but I also saw them being buried in other cases. The shrinkflation, where things on the shelf are the same price, but you're getting a significant less. Or the cost of something goes up, or on the federal level, they mandate something to go into manufacturing that the manufacturers then have to pass on to the customer. So nothing's free, someone's paying for it. So I see this as a way for us to win in that we're not trying to say, the state says, here's the max we can charge. We're staying here because it tells the people who are looking at the area going, well, Johnson Creek, that's a highway. We can't really compare ourselves to them because they have a highway traffic. Oconomowoc, their average household income is significantly higher than us. So again, those are not apples to apples comparison. So I don't think this is the time to raise it. I think we could get more creative in regards to how we do our funding or do our advertising and draw people in that way, saying, hey, all these other communities are this, we're this, and use that as a marketing tool and a selling tool instead of saying the state says we can go to 8, we're going to go to 8. That's how I would look at it.
Understood. Anybody else on this one? Mr. Lampy?
I just wanted to point out that the Tourism Commission minutes were in, the tourism was held on December 12th, and so those minutes are actually in the Common Council packet, I believe, from the 19th.
Anyone else on this one? Megan?
Lampy. Bartz. Smith. Schmid. Wetzel.
Aye.
Moldenhauer. Davis. Motion passed 6-1.
Thank you. All right, let's go to resolutions. I told Jeff it wouldn't be long, and look, every time I say that I'm wrong. Different Jeff. This Jeff in the back. So the first is Exhibit 9573. This is a resolution to recognize the retirement of our water, wastewater, building, and ground supervisor, Jeff DeWitt. Can I get a motion for this one?
Make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Bartz, second by Mr. Schmidt. I'm going to invite Pete and Jeff up, but as they're walking up, I will just share. And Pete, you're going to grab this one right here. Jeff is one of the nicest people I've met in my life. I don't get to talk about him tonight, Pete does, but when I first started, I was downstairs and Jeff would come in almost daily, and he'd always say, "How you do?" And it was like when you know that, like it's not always the friendliest office to be in. But Jeff always made a point just to check in and see how things were going. And when we moved upstairs, it was less, but he still managed to come in. So before I stop talking and turn it over to Pete, 37 years is incredible. I pray I have a career worthy of giving 37 years of my life to, and I'm so grateful that Jeff gave that to us. So, Pete.
Thank you. I want to thank Jeff, first for being there for me when I started. It's always nice to have someone to go to when you don't know what you're doing and where you need certain things. So Jeff, we have a vast array of buildings and grounds, as everyone here knows, for water and wastewater spread throughout the city. The main complex, of course, with the wastewater treatment plant, but it's a lot to take in when you first start your job here in Watertown. And for me, I found myself going to Jeff all the time, like, hey Jeff, I need this. Can you do that? Where is this building? And get a complaint from a customer, and they're like, oh, I know who that is. I know what the problem is. Things like that you take for granted, and I'm going to miss that a lot. I don't have that go-to person anymore. But I've been here for 6 years now, so I've learned from Jeff, where everything is and how we get things done. So it was very, very nice to have him when I first started. So I really appreciate that, Jeff. And I do want to say something about working 37 years for the city in your role at wastewater. It hasn't always been buildings and grounds. We train everyone at wastewater and the water utility. We cross-train, so everybody has to do everybody's job every now and then, especially on weekends and holidays, and getting called in at the middle of the night for things. So you have to know a lot to take this job and to work for the city of Watertown. And for 37 years, Jeff has held that position in various ways. It's great to have somebody like that. So I don't hear a lot of that these days, where we have employees that are with the same employer for over 30 years. It's not something we see, or I see anymore. We have that baby boomer generation retiring. Some in this room are part of that, where you start a job and maybe that's your job for your entire career. So we do have those jobs here in Watertown. So Jeff's proof of that right here. He spent his entire career working for this city and dedicating his time to the citizens of Watertown. So that's very special. I give you this plaque, Jeff. Thank you very much.
You say something if you want to. Very
Nothing
good.
to say?
All right, you can go back then. Thank you.
Should we get a picture?
Oh, sure, let me get it. All right. Any other comments or questions for Jeff? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. All right, let's go to our next. This is Exhibit 9574. This is a resolution to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with Jefferson County for our GIS services. This is here from me and the Finance Committee. Go ahead, Mr. Wetzel. And Mr. Smith? The second by Mr. Smith. Comments or questions?
I'm
Yes.
just glad to see this happen. This is going to be great. I'm glad that he orchestrated this.
I normally wouldn't do this, but since Representative Penterman's in the room, if the Innovation Fund was only set up already, this would be perfect for it. We should send you a copy of this resolution so you can see how great it would have been, but it's too early, so. Anyone else? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Very good. Our last resolution is Exhibit 9575. This is a resolution petitioning the Secretary of DOT for Airport Improvement Aid. This is here from Mr. Wetzel and the Airport Commission. Motion by Mr. Wetzel and second by Mr. Moldenhauer. Comments, questions? All right.
I don't know if we need Mr. Baum to share anything, if you'd like to. This is basically a wish list for the airport. There's no money involved, it's just. we
Get the
have
list in to make us eligible for funding.
Yep.
Good. Anybody else on this one? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, we are now at a point in our agenda where we have comments and suggestions from citizens present. If anyone would like to comment, or anyone remotely. All right, with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Oh, not everybody at once. Motion by Mr. Schmidt, second by Mr. Wetzel. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.